The revelations of this nurse, who has been caring for the dying for many years, have caused a real resonance among doctors, scientists, and millions of people around the world. No one could have imagined that an ordinary hospice worker would become a living witness to incredible things that challenge modern concepts of science and medicine. She said the following: "My parents were probably atheists because they never talked about religion. I didn't believe in heaven or hell. I wasn't afraid of hell, but the fear of death was strong. The very thought of death terrified me. However, as I watched the hospice patients, I began to realize that they really see what they are talking about. That's how I started to believe in life after death. It happened literally in the first 6 months of my work there." Penny Smith, an experienced hospice nurse from Washington, said in an interview. For more than 20 years, Penny has worked in various positions at the hospice. She is now retired but continues to work part-time, helping to improve patient care and train other nurses. Death scares the vast majority of people, but those who work in hospices see that this is not as scary as it is commonly believed. However, the topic itself is still taboo, which further increases fear. We don't talk about it, we don't understand it, and therefore we are afraid. The fear of the unknown is at the root of many misconceptions. This story happened to Penny herself. She was already working in her specialty after completing nursing courses, but had not yet joined a hospice. An ordinary hospital with its frenzied daily rhythm does not have the time for leisurely patient monitoring. In a large clinic, the death of a patient is only a line in the statistical report of the department for the day. Penny lost her father at that time in her life, and the night after the funeral, the woman had a dream. She saw him. He was made of warm orange light and said that he was feeling good now, so there was no need to grieve so much. This was the first confirmation that there is something else after life. When she shared her vision with her family, her brother, who rejected the idea of an afterlife, did not believe her. But my sister and mom were confused. They had to make sure that Penny was telling the truth, although it happened much later. In the future, they realized that she was telling the truth. When Penny told her family about her vision, her brother, who did not believe in an afterlife, was skeptical. My sister and mother were puzzled, but later they realized that Penny was telling the truth. A year later, he appeared in a dream to Laura, Penny's sister, and suggested a solution to a difficult family problem. Another 10 years passed, and their mother became convinced that her daughters had actually seen her husband. Now he is constantly present in her dreams at night and acts as her personal guardian angel during the day, warning of any dangers. Her brother had never experienced anything like this before, but perhaps in order to survive such events, you need to be more open to their perception. If a person does not believe in this, then he will not have such an experience. Penny was told about a similar case of the return of the dead to earthly life by her colleague. He and his wife were driving when the terrible accident happened. His wife died, and he suffered multiple injuries. The man constantly reproached himself for surviving, but his beloved did not. And then one day she came to him in a dream and said, "I've come to say goodbye. You have nothing to reproach yourself with. I'll be waiting for you in a better world. I'll come back to see you off, but not right now." The rest of the cases described in the book have already occurred in the hospice. They are so exciting that I just couldn't help but include them in this video. In one of the rooms there was a man dying of cirrhosis of the liver. He was unconscious almost all the time, and when he came to, he reacted inadequately to the surrounding environment. The only thing that comforted him was his tiny dog, who was always with him on the bed. An elderly woman with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis was lying in the next room. She decided to voluntarily give up food and water in order to commit suicide. This woman had been in a hospice for a long time and knew about the local tradition. After the patient's death, doctors and relatives of the deceased drank non-alcoholic champagne and said kind words about the deceased. She decided that she wanted to make a similar celebration before her death, so that she could personally hear what none of the deceased could appreciate. Since she had no living relatives left, she invited the entire hospice staff to her farewell banquet. All the evening shift workers gathered around her bed. Everyone had a glass in their hands and everyone said something nice about her. When the last person made his speech, she died. It was an unusual and magical moment because it rarely happens that a person says, "I'm dying," and then really dies. But in this case, it happened, and his daughter was in the man's room at that time. He didn't react to her presence, and his chihuahua, as usual, was dozing next to his helpless master. But after the patient died in the next room, the dog woke up and barked. The man woke up from this, to his daughter's surprise, sat up in bed, peered into the open doorway and said clearly, "Who are you? I've never met you before." He seemed to listen to the answer, then lay down and fell back into oblivion. The daughter claimed that there was no one at the door, and the staff was sure that the spirit of the deceased woman had passed by the next room and said goodbye to its occupant. People often make strange gestures before they die. This is due to near-death visions, when relatives, friends, and even pets from the other world come to the dying. It usually starts a couple of weeks before death, and patients often talk about what is happening. During such visits, patients reach out to those they see, but healthy people do not. Penny is convinced that when people reach up to the ceiling, they reach for their loved ones who visit them at the end of their lives. This phenomenon is well known, and there is more to it than just convulsive hand movements. Dying people don't do this by accident, and it matters, but often the staff observes completely different, recognizable gestures. Dying people allegedly smoke cigarettes or embroider, fish, or wash clothes. Nurses believe that at this moment, patients mentally rethink their lives and do what they have always enjoyed. But when people start mindlessly fiddling with their clothes or their own skin in the last hours, it cannot be correlated with habitual actions. Penny Smith has a very shocking theory about this. Do you want to know what she means? She believes that dying people are trying to shed their skin like a snake and prepare for what will happen after this life. This is, of course, a controversial guess, but it is based on many years of experience in dealing with dying people. Now, let's take a closer look at the cases of near-death visions. Penny tells a very interesting story. John was in the room right next to the nurse's station. His wife, Ingrid, had died a year before, and now he was dying too. One morning, there were screams from his room. When the nurse entered, she saw John staring into an empty corner, tears streaming down his face, and he was exclaiming, "Ingrid! Ingrid is here! My wife is here, I can see her. She'll come for me soon and take me away for good. He will definitely come, but not today, but tomorrow. Definitely tomorrow." But nothing happened the next day, and the day after that too. John was alive, and on the third day, he finally died. His sister Gina came to collect the deceased's belongings. Penny told her the story. Gina listened attentively to the story, nodded as if agreeing, and said, "Well, that's always the case with Ingrid. She's never been anywhere on time in her life." There are amazing witness-confirmed cases of near-death visions appearing in blind patients. For example, an elderly woman who became blind many years ago as a result of an accident points to the ceiling and calls names before her death, as if greeting her friends. "Rob, did you come too? And Millie? I'm so glad to see you all here." One day, Penny was approached by the daughter of another patient with a request to give her mother a cure for hallucinations. The nurse entered the room and heard the dying woman enthusiastically calling out many different names. When Penny tried to make sense of what was happening, it turned out that she was listing the names of relatives and friends who had already died. The patient exclaimed, "Katie, did you come for me? Oh my God, Mom, Dad, is it really you?" The nurse explained to the dying woman's daughter that these were not hallucinations, but visions on her deathbed. A woman really sees people who died before her. Obviously, this does not frighten her, but on the contrary, it brings comfort and brightens up the last days of her life. Children's hospice workers say that children see pets more often than people. No, of course, it happens that they are visited by deceased relatives before their death. But this happens less often. The child has little experience with people, and very rarely they get to attend funerals. The life of four-legged pets is much shorter, and almost all children remember the death of their pet. It is very common and absolutely normal for a person whose life is about to end to see dead loved ones. Usually such visions bring great comfort. Penny notes that as patients' physical bodies weaken, their spiritual selves become stronger. At this moment, they are half in this world, and the other half in the next. So they sort of travel between worlds. They begin to feel some new clarity in understanding what life is. The dying gain wisdom and begin to see with spiritual eyes. The process of death has its own dynamics. People start sleeping more, eating less, and becoming more detached from others. The skin turns pale due to a slowdown in blood flow, and breathing becomes difficult. These phenomena occur during the transition period, when a person has several weeks, days, or even hours to live. The closer the end is, the less a person perceives the earthly world. When a dying person wakes up or regains consciousness, it seems that he is no longer quite there. In the last hours of life, patients often become completely indifferent to what is happening around them. Are you interested in whether people see angels in their near-death visions? There is no definite answer to this question. Perhaps they see something, or rather, you can say that they see someone. Sometimes such visions begin as shadows, and the dying person does not immediately realize who is in front of him. In some cases, people are firmly convinced that they see angels in various forms. Visions at the end of life are so common that they can be considered one of the signs of impending death. Relatives and friends may ask the dying person in recent days if he has seen anything unusual. Perhaps he will share amazing stories that would have remained unknown without such a question. People who remain clear-minded rarely talk about such visions on their own initiative, fearing that others might consider them out of their mind. The reasons for these visions are not fully known, but one thing is clear. They are not related to medication or illness. Usually such visions bring a lot of peace and comfort to the dying person, and it is important to remember that this is an absolutely normal phenomenon. Another topic that is very interesting to many: what do most people say before they die? In Penny's opinion, nothing. Although movies make us believe that there is some kind of epiphany before death, and the dying person says such important last words, and then closes his eyes and quietly leaves. In fact, this is not the case. Most often, people die in their sleep. The reality is that you probably don't realize that these are the last words, and only when death becomes apparent will you be able to look back and remember what you heard. There are times when people really say something memorable before they die. For example, one of the patients told the nurse that he was ready to hang up the phone forever before he took his last breath. But such cases are very rare. Therefore, if you are hoping that your dying loved one will say some profound words that will change your life, then most likely this will not happen. An elderly hospice patient had a daughter who was a nun and often visited her mother. One Sunday evening, a nun came out of the room, approached Penny, and said, "She's gone. No, don't rush. She's still here, she's dying, but her spirit is already gone. You can see it by looking into her eyes." The nurse entered the room and saw that the woman had a completely blank, glassy stare. Sometimes the soul can leave its body before it dies. Brandon was not yet 20 years old, but he was dying. His father died before he was born. Lorraine, his mother, raised her son alone. She knew that her child's life would not be long, but now that everything was so close to the end, she felt real fear. Penny saw that by all indications the young man's death would come very soon, and the mother in despair refused to accept the inevitable. And then the nurse suggested to Lorraine that she just let her son go, explaining to him how much she cared about him. Brandon happily listened to his mother's words, took a deep breath, and died. It was a relief for everyone. This amazing woman has been collecting all these observations for years to share them with her readers and subscribers. Penny Smith absolutely does not fit into the ideal image of a compassionate lady who has devoted her whole life to serving people. She never thought she would become a nurse. She was born in 1958 and spent a turbulent youth. In her life, there was alcohol, early pregnancy, abandonment of her newborn son, and even prison. It was only at the age of 40 that she decided to go to nursing school, because after the divorce she was left with children, without a profession, and without means of livelihood. After receiving the certificate, Penny went to work in a regular clinic, and a year and a half later, she saw an advertisement for recruitment to a new hospice. As soon as Penny started working, she realized that a lot of amazing things were happening here and began writing down stories about her patients. It was these notes that formed the basis of a future book. And she started running her social media channels during the 2020 pandemic, when she was forced to stay at home. Penny believes that her mission is to tell people the harsh truth about death and dying. She openly talks about the everyday life of her department in order to eliminate misconceptions about the work of doctors. Hospice workers do not make drug addicts out of your relatives by injecting them with painkillers, and they do not try to hasten the death of the patient in order to make room for the next patient. The staff tries to brighten up the last months or days of the dying, make their stay in the ward as pleasant as possible, and facilitate the transition to the next world. That is why she is extremely sincere in her books and videos. She wants people to believe her. We see many confirmations of how, at the time of death, a person's soul is reborn into a higher being. It's time to believe in this and stop being afraid of the moment of death, because in essence it represents only the passage of the line between our world and the afterlife. It is important to participate fearlessly in the discussion of death and dying because it is inevitable. We will all face this personally someday. Write in the comments, what do you think about all this? How do you feel about Penny Smith, and do you believe her? Dear friends, if you liked my video, then please like it. In addition, I recommend watching my other video. For example, about another hospice nurse, Julie McFadden. She tells truly incredible things that happen to her patients. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.